Hello again. Uh, Another lecture. Happy to have you here. In this lecture, we turn our attention to the social and political events in Southeast Asia that played an important role in maritime Buddhism. While we are trying to see the religious dimensions, the large amount of data for all of Southeast Asia has prompted scholars to make geographic and political divisions in order to organize it. The problem is that cultural features are not easily contained within these constructed boundaries. As we try to document the spread of Buddhism in the region, it soon becomes obvious that even with all the large data sets related to Southeast Asia, our sources for this study of the journey of religious ideas and practices are very limited. In the earliest period of the appearance of Buddhism in the region, we have only vague traces of information, and much of what is available is difficult to date. While I will attempt to give as accurate an account as possible, be aware that it is by no means assured to be a formulation that will stand the test of time and new discoveries and insights in the future. If we consider the Great Circle of Buddhism, it is a defined area, but was never fixed or unchanging. Just the opposite. The diffusion of Buddhism in its spatial dimension expanded and ebbed over time. Any map of it is at best a mere snapshot of some moment in history. Now, graphic descriptions of data, however lacking in precision they may be, have long been a part of scholarship. The surface of the earth remains stable and invites development of images, especially maps, to depict the shifting human activities that have occurred on it. Since our data is often described in terms of divisions, it is well to review the various approaches. The area over which Buddhism spread eastward from India has been divided into two major units. It is viewed as either mainland Southeast Asia, we use the initials MSCA, or island Southeast Asia, ISEA. Mainland Southeast Asia comprises the landmass in the southeast corner of Eurasia, now the nations of Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Island Southeast Asia refers to the offshore areas such as Indonesia, Borneo, Sulawesi, and Bali. Along with these geographic divisions, Southeast Asian history is identified with a number of empires or kingdoms. As we see on this slide, the area identified as the kingdom of Sri Vijaya can be designated by using maps with layers of different colors. We can find many maps that claim to provide a clear view of the boundaries that existed for governing in past centuries. Let's start with the Pyu people of what is now Myanmar. The Pyu city-states were an example of what can be called hinterland culture of mainland Southeast Asia. The cultural and even economic core of the period was to be found away from the coast. This urban development was in place during the last century before the Common Era. This map provides the spatial footprint for a number of low-density cities that had fortifications surrounding the settlements, that had cultivated fields and water management through lakes and canals. Similar urban patterns continued to be in place centuries later in cities such as the one that surrounded the ruins of Angkor Wat. The few city-states carried on trade by sea through the riverine environment of the Irrawaddy. Inscriptions indicating Buddhist presence began to appear in the 5th to the 7th centuries. From these traces, we can with some assurance speak of Buddhism that mirrored the maritime typology: early Buddhism, Mahayana, and Tantra. The ascendant Theravada tradition, that is, when Theravada came to be the dominant aspect of Buddhism, came by the 12th century. The focus of these inland city-states created a cultural pattern found in mainland Southeast Asia that was related to maritime life, but not dominated by it. If we move further east, our next named site is Dvaravati in the Prachao Basin and the delta of present-day Thailand. However, as we've seen before, these names for empires and kingdoms were often without a firm basis. Dvaravati is more a designation of an area that is marked by similar artifacts. In a sense, it is an art historical way of mapping. Our major written sources are from brief references in Chinese sources. New ways of dating brick and other remains are only partially successful. However, the general trend is to push back the early dates to at least the 4th century for the artifacts that are used to draw such a boundary. A map, such as the one we see in this slide, is quite vague. It implies boundary markers, but our data for them are inconsistent. And so boundaries shown by perfectly drawn circles often have no factual basis. Now, looking at this map, which displays kingdoms to the east of Dvaravati, we see the Khmer and the Champa areas of present-day mainland Southeast Asia, Cambodia, and South Vietnam. To the south, the Malay Peninsula and Indonesia are shown as the island Southeast Asia kingdoms of Srivijaya and Shailendra. Some of the earliest maritime Buddhist references were found in the areas identified with Srivijaya and Shailendra, that is, island Southeast Asia. Over time, there was a shift of dominant Buddhist influences from island Southeast Asia to mainland Southeast Asia. It was not so much a movement of people and cultural patterns from island Southeast Asia to mainland Southeast Asia, as it was the growth of the tradition among the peoples of the mainland and the shrinking of it in the islands. In a previous lecture, the discussion was about the way in which Theravada Buddhism became ascendant in the mainland. You will recall that a Buddhist way of dividing up space in Southeast Asia was the identification of two zones of Theravada, Eastern and Western. Both of them are primarily focused on mainland Southeast Asia. While events of the Eastern zone of Theravada can be dated as earlier, Theravada had a presence in the Western zone by the 4th century. It will be helpful for your future references to have some knowledge of the zones, the kingdoms, the empires, as well as geological features such as mainland and island Southeast Asia. Well, as we move our discussion across mainland Southeast Asia, another element needs to be considered. Buddhism's spread in island Southeast Asia was within an ancient and continuing linguistic area known as Austronesia. This is, in one sense, a very sophisticated map based on language. Since it can be documented as a cultural feature within the great circle of Buddhism, some consideration must be made for its influence or impact. There is currently a vigorous and a productive debate about the history of this family of language use. The research in the latter part of the 20th century established that the language can be traced back in time to Taiwan as its origin. There are still non-Han people in Taiwan that have their own language and culture. They maintained a long-lasting cultural base in Taiwan that had little reference to Chinese. The language spread over a wide area. Linguistic features are found from Taiwan across the Polynesian islands of the Pacific, Hawaii, New Zealand, Tahiti. Perhaps even more surprising is the appearance of the language in Madagascar, off the coast of Eastern Africa. There is no Austronesian presence anywhere in Australia, and it did not penetrate far inland in mainland Southeast Asia. It was, for the most part, the language used by seafarers and hinterlands connected to ports. When the content of the vocabulary is analyzed, there is little support for the idea that the names for maritime technology existed in the original form of the language found in Taiwan. So this raises the question of how a Taiwanese form of language could, over thousands of years, spread among mariners when it did not have words for the major items in their lives. The suggestion is that the Taiwan original language came in contact with many different peoples in island Southeast Asia, and major changes in vocabulary occurred that were not reflected in Taiwan. there is evidence of long-range spread of plants as well as technology. Scholars have long considered the case of the banana tree that originated in New Guinea and may have been cultivated in Africa 5,000 years ago. And some even suggest an early date for its spread to South America. I mentioned this case to show that we're often too limited in our understanding of travel and exchange among humans. The example of Buddhism being spread is not so remarkable when we understand how humans have managed to move about the earth for millennia. It may be important for us to look at our globe and the spread of humans with new eyes. If we move from a global view of the land surface of the earth to a flattened one, it shows us that the land masses which seem so distant from one another on a globe are basically one island surrounded by sea. Thus, movement can be land-based to most corners of the earth. That is, one can walk from South Africa to Chile with only small crossings of water. Using boats to navigate the coastlines can account for long-range movement without resorting to open seas. It is only when we consider places such as New Zealand and Hawaii that long-range sea travel was the only choice for humans to make as they journeyed across the globe. The languages of both these island outposts belong to Austronesians. This tells us that the voyagers to distant uninhabited islands were remarkable for their ability to go out on the open seas and navigate. They were the true pioneers for long ocean voyages. For our purposes, I suggest that we look at the linguistic mapping of Austronesian languages and compare it to the Great Circle of Buddhism. The two overlap, especially in island Southeast Asia. The footprint of the Austronesian languages in most cases predates Buddhism by many centuries. Therefore, when we find similar patterns, it implies that the origin for them was in place long before Buddhist travelers set sail. One example is the explanation of the way in which influences moved during the spread of Austronesian languages. It is thought that the movement from place to place was done through systems of exchange. Some of this was land-based, since the items to be exchanged were often food and natural items that could be found locally and were traded in short edges or circles. Longer circles were maritime. Such activity was still being reflected in the maritime trade of Buddhist times. As we have heard in previous lectures, the nodes of trading, circuits, and the edges or connections between them were avenues for exchange of goods as well as culture and ideas. In other words, the study of Austronesian languages shows us that certain patterns found in the spread of maritime Buddhism had been in place long before Buddhist monks and merchants, whether Arab or Greek or Indian, set up their systems. Austronesian speakers played a critical role in navigation and ship construction. They used double canoes, catamans, outriggers, as well as what's been called lashed lug boats, using ropes to tie the boards together rather than nails. Their advances in technology and mastery of sailing is only now beginning to be recognized. It may seem a marginal aspect of maritime Buddhism, but these points are crucial to a recognition that the people of this earth were travelers and traders by land and sea thousands of years ago. While our written accounts focused on how the Greeks and the Western Asian people mastered long-distance sailing across the Indian Ocean, they were part of a long history of maritime travel and technology. Just as we see the sea lanes of today following the ancient routes from the Red Sea to China, it is important to remember that these patterns are often much older than those of trading between India and Rome and China during the maritime Buddhist era. Such long established activities show us that the travel of Buddhist monks and Indian merchants by long-range ocean journeys was not without precedence in human history. Thank you very much.